Okay, we're going to welcome our last guest. We're going to have a really nice conversation, fireside chat, as they say, with Nigel Poulton of MSB.com and NigelPoulton.com. Trainer, man I've known for many years. Really pleased to see what he's up to and what's going on in the world of Kubernetes from somebody who is, if not on the coalface, at least on the what we'll call it the coalface. You're not necessarily putting a lot of stuff into production, I think, but you are talking to a heck of a lot of people who are and building content around and teaching people. So Nigel, welcome to the. I was going to say welcome to the show. Welcome to this event. Thank you.
That's cool. Thank you, John. It's actually it's a huge privilege. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, hey, like I say, it's been interesting. I think we're going to hit it from 2 points here. One is your kind of personal journey of being a content producer. You're full time doing training and courses and books. You'll be at KubeCon this next week, doing some workshops and stuff, as well as kind of, you get to see. You're an infrastructure background person. You get to see what is going on and what people have trouble with, what people are interested in, and you have to try to keep up, which is probably your second full-time job.
Yeah, you know what? To that point, I say all the time, I live and breathe this cloud native, containers, Kubernetes, all this kind of stuff. Literally, it's what I think of when I get out of bed on the morning, and quite often it's what I fall asleep thinking to at night. And if you were to ask my wife, I'm sure a lot of people be in like a similar situation here, but if you were to ask her, she would say I spend an unhealthy and unholy amount of time with this stuff. But I always feel like I'm playing catch up. I mean, this stuff it's a ride, I'll tell you that. It is iterating like at warp speed. It is,
it's interesting. Like I say, as an observer, that's a challenge. But let's talk about you for a second. I mean, if somebody just on chat just said, "Hey, Nigel's book got me started." You got into this. You were doing some Pluralsight stuff, or maybe some training. You were blogging back in the day, and you jumped in feet first. I believe it was with a Docker book. I don't know. Can you just talk a little bit about maybe that transition and kind of what your journey has been like? And doing all these and so now you have a whole. People can go to NigelPoulton.com or MSB. You can do all sorts of. You got books and We'll talk about all that stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I don't want to take too much time talking about the content and stuff that I produce. It's out there. People can find it. I think like quite a long time ago, I think Docker was at something like version 0.7. And I started playing around with it. And I found myself at an HP Discover event. I was a guest of Calvin Zito, if you know Calvin. And I was sat at lunch with him one day, and I think, if I remember right, the very first DockerCon was going on at the same time. And I said to Calvin, "Look, Calvin, mate, I love you. You know I do. And, the event's great, and we're enjoying ourselves. But I just got to admit, I wish I was at DockerCon instead." And we had a bit of a laugh about that. But I think, certainly since Docker 0.9, I just threw myself at it. And I think the journey is something that probably everybody that's listening now and will potentially listen to the recording will be able to, or maybe this kind of journey will resonate with them. I just felt like sea change was coming, and it reminded me of the very first time I heard of VMware, like, I don't know, however many years ago, but it really did. It felt like, the first time I saw VMware, I thought, yeah, you know what? This is game changing, and it just makes sense. And I felt the same thing with containers. And I think, like, I'm super fortunate, like everybody, that we live in a time where access to technology and access to be able to teach yourself and to learn is just at an all-time greatest. I think back to when I was trying to learn Windows NT4 for my MCSE, and how hard it was to spin up infrastructure with CDs, and you wanted to break things, but you knew that you had like 6 hours to rebuild your domain afterwards. And, it was on a couple of dusty old compact PCs in the corner of the bedroom that...
I bet they were not quiet either.
Yeah, no, they were noisy. Yeah. Whereas now we've got, so many cloud-based resources and things. There's books, there's videos, there's hands-on stuff that can help you learn. We just live in such a great time to tinker with technology and to grab hold of your own career, really. And honestly, like I said before, it's super hard to keep up. I mean, I was telling you not so long ago that I looked at the KubeCon agenda, and I live and breathe this stuff, right? And I'm just looking at some of the stuff on the agenda, and I'm like, I don't even know what some of this stuff is. That's how fast, the core Kubernetes project is iterating, but the ecosystem and the community and what they're contributing, it's like, I want to say, this is going to sound cheesy, right? But it's a bit of a golden age for sort of infrastructure technology. And I really believe that anybody who is into VMware and infrastructure and, software-defined networking and storage and anything like that, if they've not looked at Kubernetes yet, take a look at it, give it a chance, and honestly, you'll fall in love with it. Because I was one of these people who I grew up watching like sci-fi stuff on the TV and just dreaming of living in a day where I was surrounded by amazing technologies. That sounds super cheesy, hey John. I'm really
sorry. Well, I when I was a kid too, I saw Mr. Spock there writing YAML like a future person, and I was really impressed too.
Yeah. But now I just real quick, I feel like, if you take something on like Kubernetes and it's new to you, it has the potential to bring the excitement of technology back into your life. And I'll go quiet for a bit now.
That's interesting, because it is, you were on, we were just talking about some of the rough edges, and one of the things, I mean, so as we're taping this on November 14th, just yesterday, Docker just announced a corporate restructuring where a piece, the enterprise side went with Mirantis, which is we're big in the OpenStack and in the Kubernetes world. So that's kind of more the enterprise arm now, and a lot of people and friends of mine are now over there. And then they're doubling down on the desktop tools and the hub and kind of just the individual tools, which is in some ways when you first start with Docker, right? That individual experience, that even if you're not doing CI/CD or whatever, that packaging and how easy it was, and oh my God, so much simpler than a lot of different things. And that then can translate into production, and some of the ease of use that they really worked hard on struck me anyway. So I don't know, and I don't want to. So Nigel, I'm just kind of curious your perspective on. And so Kubernetes is known to be kind of ugly and hard to work with. That you pop the hood open, you stick your arm right down there in the engine sometimes. I don't know. Personal story, your perspective on the whole Docker kind of evolution. Ease of use, I guess, didn't save them, or maybe the individual developers versus enterprise use case are so different that they couldn't exist in the same company. And also, you started with some Docker books and training. Now you've more recently, been focused more on the Kubernetes side, as was Docker, right? Everyone was building into that functionality. But I don't know, a little bit of perspective on this evolution and the ease of use.
Sure. So, I mean, I speak for myself here, okay? I don't speak on behalf of Docker Inc. or anybody. I think the announcement yesterday that they are spinning out the enterprise platform and that they're going to refocus more on the developer tooling and the developer experience strikes me personally as a smart move. Excuse me, in no way am I saying that they're not going through a difficult period at the moment. They certainly are. But I feel like this isn't the greatest comparison, okay? But, we all know that Microsoft not so long ago tried to do a lot of things that weren't their core competency. But and then they weren't alone on that, okay? And they did a huge refocus. And I will hold my hand up and say, I think as an organization, like a lot of other organizations, okay, other options exist, they are rocking it at the moment. Back to their core competencies, really focusing, well, I say back to core competencies, I mean, they've kind of reinvented themselves with Azure and what have you, but they're focusing on the enterprise, and they're focusing on what the kind of infrastructure and stuff that they've done well in the past and got rid of phones and, all that kind of stuff. I kind of wonder if Docker Inc. are doing a similar thing. And I've been asked a lot by people for well over a year now, John, are Docker going to go away? And what happens if they do? I'm talking about Big D Docker here, Docker Inc. Yeah. And the important thing is not so much the company. there's great people there, and I love them. Don't get me wrong, right? But I think everybody that's truly involved in it will say they've changed the world, and what is important is the technology stack, and it's open sourced, and it's used heavily and hugely. I expect that to go nowhere other than further forward. Docker and Kubernetes, buzzword for you, okay? I'm not a fan of, but they are very synergistic, okay? I know they've had some products that compete in the past, Swarm competing with Kubernetes and what have you. But Docker is the core runtime and the image format and things like that, which are what are at the heart of Docker, heavily leveraged by Kubernetes and by the wider cloud native ecosystem. So I think, and I'm not trying in any way to be a shill here, I think exciting times are still ahead for them there. And Kubernetes, look, all the things that we're doing now, if you go to events like KubeCon, a recurring theme is that we build on the shoulder of giants. And that's, core technologies like Linux and TCP/IP and things like that. And I would absolutely include containers, modern containers that were brought to us by Docker in that foundation that we're all building and rocking on at the moment. Yeah.
And in turn, that was built on a set of, Linux technologies, like LXC and other containers and jails, but they do, but beautifully packaged so that you could actually, that you could use it. And sure, you could still get down to that.
To mere mortals like us, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, as a trainer, let's get into. We got a couple topics here, but as a trainer, as a teacher, we were talking about some of the complexity and the golden age, the opportunity here. Is there any concepts in Kubernetes right now that people get tripped up on if they're coming from the more traditional world?
So it is a huge change, and you can either embrace that or you can be afraid of it. And I feel like if you're working in technology these days, and you're afraid of change, I don't mean to disrespect anybody here. You're probably in the wrong industry now, because change is the new normal. And actually, on the topic of change, so back in the old days, we'd have these huge old monolithic applications running on bare metal servers, VMs sometime, well, a lot of the time increasingly. But don't mind me saying, big old Oracle applications that we would plan huge holiday weekends to do upgrades on, and it would be all hands to the pump. Pizzas all weekend in the office. Nobody was allowed to go home. You had the CIO's cell number on speed dial, and you would do a change like this for your major finance apps and stuff like that, maybe once or twice a year. As you move into like the cloud native world and deploying microservices applications on Kubernetes, it's not easy. Okay, the bar is the bar for entry is quite high. There's a lot you've got to learn, but you will be moving to a world where you're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be stepping out of your comfort zone a lot if you're coming from a traditional environment. And again, you can either run from it or you can embrace it. But that kind of discomfort means things like lots and lots of changes going on. Applications that are massively distributed, huge flux on the network. Every application component is replicated multiple times. Everyone's got its own IP address. They can be short-lived. They've got to talk over a network. You're exposing all of your traffic. That kind of in the old monolithic applications used to be, you'd have all these different components. I'm going to be simplify this here, right? But in a single binary, let's just say, talking over Unix sockets or named pipes or whatever. And it was relatively secure compared to everything talking to everything else over an IP network. Getting really scary, really scalable. I'm going to say, John, for me, right? And I think for people who embrace change, it is so much more fun. If I think, if I was to dream tonight about going back 5, certainly 10 years, I would wake up with the shakes and a cold sweat.
Well, yeah, I love that wasn't a simple answer, but I think it's great. I think of myself as, again, as the observer here. Olden days where you're super proud of how long a server had lasted. Like we had inside
Yeah.
VMware, we passed around some screenshots of servers that
Oh, yeah.
had been patched, but they'd been up for years, right? Super cool. And in fact, you didn't want anything to fall over, right? That's your whole job, is to not let anything reboot, right? Because God knows if it comes back. Or the war rooms, or where you're okay, we're going to do a release. I was involved in some of those just with web apps, and it's like, we're going to release this app. Everybody, tell your wives and children and spouses that they may never see you again. We're all going to go into this room and try to launch this thing, and that's terrible. Like, and then I see people who are very I forget what's the terminology that the DevOps that the state of that they use, the people who are super competent, and they're releasing code multiple times a day, these unicorns, right? And they're just having a lot of fun. You can release all the code you want on a Friday because there's no sweat, right? You can roll. Again, that's much more than Kubernetes. That's a huge amount of infrastructure and process and culture about being able to roll things out and roll things back and feature flags and da 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 da. But it's just a different. You still need these. I still maintain that IT still needs to bring kind of the big boy pants. That's a sexist term. The grown up pants to the table, like, and worry about compliance and security and uptime and how many bits are going to, that disk is not magic. There's IOPS and there's IO, and you're really tunneling. You're gonna multiplex all that traffic through that one link. Did you realize you're doing that? Because that's why the app's not, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So there's some hardcore realities when the software hits the hardware, et cetera, and the architecture.
There are. Can I make a point then? So I'll say two things. So the first thing is, those screenshots that you're passing around these days would be how many times in day you've updated an application component.
Love it.
If it's been on the same rev for a year or something like that, then it'd be like, really, what's wrong there? But I think if you're coming from a more traditional infrastructure background, if you don't mind me using that term, you must bring that grown-up attitude that you talked about there. I think that most people on the call and that will listen to it afterwards will probably come from an ops background, maybe. I'm going to feel free to say that it's true. Generally speaking, developers don't get production, and if you're not careful, they will take risks, and it's finding that balance. And as an infrastructure person, doing things like that, you have to be that voice of reason without, and this is what I want to say, what we got wrong in the past, and maybe it was more me than other people, but was getting in the way of the business innovating. With hindsight, I did a little bit too much of that. I'm not saying that I got all powerful in my infrastructure roles and said, I have the keys to production and thou shalt not do this because it's against corporate policy or whatever. For the sake of it, I mean. But sometimes, just with hindsight, I wish I had been a little bit more flexible and a little bit. So you will bring a lot to your cloud native sort of deployments and things like that, but be prepared to change a lot, and that's the fun of it, right? John, I want to say something as well, because I was listening in to when you were talking to Suresh, that talking about adoption of Kubernetes now and some of the risks that come with that. I would just offer a slightly alternative view in maybe that the risks that I see are, if you don't get started soon, the potential of being left behind. What I would caveat it with, though, is to say, of course, I don't mean take your line of business production applications and refactor them onto microservices on Kubernetes as your first job, right? My advice is always to start as an individual and get your head around it, okay? I've got materials that help with that. There's plenty of stuff out there. We talked about this golden age of harnessing and learning and driving your own career, right? but then work on starting up a specialist team within your organization and take an easy application and containerize it and run it on Kubernetes and learn. And then take another one and another one, and then start to think, right, we're building some patterns here. We're building up some knowledge and some expertise within the organization. We've got a team, a SWAT team or whatever. And then we start to push it out to the wider organization. That would be my advice, right? Because I do fear a little bit that, I just remember when I was working at organizations, like I've said sometimes, I was a little bit of a blocker to innovation sometimes.
No, but the no in innovation. We're not going to do that over my dead body.
And I'm trying to make up for that in a little bit now by saying, let's get on these new things now. Not the super new stuff necessarily, but the stuff that is generally, that's GA within Kubernetes. Some of the more mature ecosystem products that plug into it as well, and start taking little bites and then start taking bigger bites, because you want to start this rolling. I know that you can start too early on some technologies, but I feel like we're past that now. Like the core workload stuff in Kubernetes. So around like running applications and the storage and the networking and things like that, I personally feel are at a maturity point where we should be starting at the very least to be taking small bites.
That's and thank you, for taking our conversation from like some sort of a bar room drunken, more talking about the old days and wouldn't it be cool and trading over drinks sort of a conversation. But that was, I think it was interesting. It was kind of borderline. We were borderline between we should have been over drinks and interesting. I hope it stayed interesting. But to this concrete advice, because I was talking, so that's interesting, because you do train organizations too and things like that, not just individuals. So that's an interesting perspective of how to take a bite, right? To start with a project in a way that's a little bit different than you don't have to be all or nothing, et cetera. I was actually just talking with a consulting company this morning who they're like, one of our main priorities is that we're not a VAR. Like we're an expert in all this cloud native stuff, and we have to help people understand that we can help them exactly that, right? How can we, and somebody just mentioned it on chat, which made me think of it, how that we can actually help them, and because everybody's going to need help, because again, do you just send off, one engineer, or, you try to find, like you say, you try to find something small and simple to kind of, even to understand it, even if you end up, it's not like you just invented a flying car. You just it might even be that the utility of what comes out of the first project may be exactly the same. It's not like this is magic, but at least you understood. I try to do that with all my projects, right? It might still be some, at least these, right? These Tech Reckoning Fest are very primitive. We just fire up Zoom and we go. But we're learning what works in live events. We're having great conversations. Et cetera, right? So just start, I guess, is the, hey, I want to, go to that. And then let's talk about something real.
No, sorry.
Oh, I said, if you have any, let's switch over. But if you had any final comments on that segment.
No, I don't have anything final. I thought you summarized it pretty well there.
I'm a terrible interviewer because I can't shut up. When this morning, we actually talked this morning, your afternoon, and we were talking about stuff that you're interested in next week. You're going to be there. You've got workshops all day Monday, I guess. Is that it?
That's right. Yeah.
And there's still a little bit of space, but you do all this stuff, but you've got a full week. And I asked you what you were interested in, and you were like, and you got super excited. So I'm gonna, and I actually did not know much about this and this K3S stuff. So tell me a little bit about it. Go.
So there's three things that I'm super excited about at the moment. One of them, real quick, that I'll mention first is that yes, I write books and I make videos and stuff like that, and I love doing it. And I love connecting with people, and they would always come back to me at the end and say, look, Nigel, I loved your book or your videos and stuff. Now what do I do to take my journey to the next level? And it was always, get your hands dirty, right? Get your hands on and just play as much as you can. So something I'm really excited about at the moment, from my perspective, I'm helping build an online Kubernetes training platform where you get your own private cluster. We've got curated lessons. You can build and play and trash till your heart's content, called Magic Sandbox or MSB.com. That's super simple, right? The things I'm looking forward to at KubeCon next week are the things that I'm fortunate, right, because they're super cool, but they're also the things that everybody seems to be talking about right now. And one of them is service mesh, and the other one is K3S or keys. So I'll talk about K3S first, just because I've mentioned learning, right? So I think we kind of get it that Kubernetes can be a little bit hard sometimes to set up and to get your head around and what have you. And when I was telling people in the past, like, get your hands on, my recommendation was always Minikube or Docker Desktop. Both of them relatively easy to get on your laptop. I think Docker Desktop, for me personally, was a little bit slicker because I could download like an MSI file or something and next, and I'd have like Docker and a Kubernetes cluster. But a drawback to both of them was that you got one node. And so that one node was your Kubernetes master and it was your Kubernetes worker node. And it was cool because it was on your laptop. But if you wanted to test proper scheduling and rolling updates and failovers of your applications between worker nodes and stuff like that, you couldn't do it. So along comes a project called K3S from the guys at Rancher Labs. And the idea for K3S at first was to have this really slimmed down, small, certified Kubernetes distribution that was originally designed for like edge devices and IoT stuff. And it does, it does work great for that. I think like in total, the distribution is 40 meg and you can run it on machines with like less than half a gig of RAM, it really lightweight and super easy to spin up. But when you spin it up, what you get is like a full Kubernetes API or API buzzword, right? So you get a full Kubernetes experience, but with multiple worker nodes, and you can have it on your laptop, right? So you can have like effectively what looks very much like a real production Kubernetes cluster or environment on your laptop that you can build, trash, deploy applications to, the whole shebang. The only thing that it doesn't have at the moment, and it's being worked on, is high availability of the control plane. But aside from that, K3S, if you're wanting a solution on your laptop for your local Kubernetes environment for you to test and play around with, honestly, it could hardly be easier. And I see it potentially as being one of these projects that started out as being like, yeah, we're doing something really lightweight and we're making it as simple as possible for the edge and for IoT. And the community is going to say, like that, let me use it for just about everything else going forward. Now, look, I don't speak in behalf of Rancher Labs or anybody with regards to K3S. And I could be totally wrong about this, but I really see the momentum that it has at the moment and the potential that this could become like that super easy way for you to get Kubernetes cluster on your laptop, fully working, great experience.
And there have been other, like you say, there have been other versions of this, I want to say attempts. There have been other projects that do this sort of thing. It seems like this one has the slice that's the right kind of the right slice for your needs right now.
Yeah. So I mean, it has some great people behind it. Not that other projects don't. And they've done a really good job with it. It's fully certified, CNCF certified distribution of Kubernetes, but it's super small and super lightweight. And just, it's a dream if you're wanting to really start playing with Kubernetes properly, more something that looks and feels like production on your laptop, if you will.
But now, obviously, they had to cut some stuff out to get there. That's
so
or make some choice, or is it just an opinionated distribution?
Okay, maybe it's a little bit opinionated. Not super so though. I would say from cutting stuff out. I know originally they were, because without getting too technical, but Kubernetes has like, if you take the workloads API, so that where you have your deployments and things that are in there, Kubernetes capital D deployments, there was like, I'm going to say like 6 or 7 versions of the deployment API would ship with every Kubernetes distribution.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
But backwards compatibility and all that kind of jazz. And I know, and I don't know if this has changed now, but I know certainly early on they were saying we don't need to necessarily bring all of that baggage with us, and we might not need all of like the plug-in drivers and things for everything in there.
Yeah, like Linux, right? You have all those drivers. You have there's distros that have everything. That if you're going to support that distribution, you're supporting everything. And like Suresh was just talking about, that there's a lot of ways to hook this stuff up. Versus, there have been trimmed down Linux distributions forever, and there are very specialty cloud ones too. I get it. But that's cool to me that it seems it could be used in production, but yet it's actually easy enough to use as my little first child's Kubernetes.
Yeah, and I think when they have high availability of the control plane, we probably will see people using it in production. Maybe not huge clusters. But again, it ships by default with SQLite rather than etcd as the backend data store. So you're not going to be wanting it to be a huge, busy, with a high amount of churn cluster. And I can see
there might be tooling there might be tooling that does or doesn't work with it because it expects certain things. That's really cool though. And so so you're going to be it sounds like that's an active topic, something you're both excited about for people next step after your material, but also there'll be some conversation around it at next week at KubeCon.
Yeah, I just think a lot of the people that I follow and that I interact with on Twitter are talking about it a lot, and people that I like and trust.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's a good sign. It's almost magic that we have that antenna. That's the reason we need to keep Twitter around, even if it sucks. That the people who put the time in and have the right network and have that sort of antenna, early warning. Hey, a question from the chat talking about MSB and the CNCF certs like CKA and things like that. How do you map to them? How are you looking at them in terms of your curriculum?
Yeah.
Content.
Okay, so we're a startup. We're a decently funded startup, actually. If you go to msb.com and just provide your email address, we do have some free content on there so you can get a feel for what the experience is like. And I think anybody that's wanting to learn Kubernetes, because we have this live dashboard that joins everything together for you. So I write a bunch of lessons. And then as you deploy stuff, you see it build and scale and you see everything happening. So it's super cool from like connecting the dots in your head. We have CKAD is a high priority on the roadmap. CKA will come after that just because CKA is, we can implement it, but it's a little bit more difficult because it has some more hands-on, like how you build your cluster and tinker with the actual cluster side of things. And the way we present a Kubernetes cluster to you at the moment is you log in and instantly you've got your own 3-node cluster. So we're building in the future the ability for you to be able to tweak that and build stuff yourself, because that's an important part of CKA. CKAD, I believe we will have all of the content for that by the end of Q1 next year. Because we're adding new content all of the time. It's a content race for us now, really. And I feel personally that while I'm not a super huge fan of certifications in general, I know that they are highly valued increasingly by organizations. And I will say, I think that the Kubernetes certification, CKA and CKAD, the way that you tested on them, it makes them more valuable than some of the old, multiple choice, like my old MCSE on Windows NT4. That there were techniques to being able to guess the right checkbox, which was the right answer. Yeah. But we will also, just real quick, John, we'll be building in, it's almost pretty much complete anyway, a test exam simulator where we take the cluster that we give you, we break it and we say, here's a scenario, go and fix it, and we can test whether you fixed it properly and stuff. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
That's cool. It seems like you're having fun, right? Right?
It's awesome, honestly. There's so much cool stuff going on. I sound like a shill sometimes, but I'm one of these people. I would like to actually kind of live in the future so that I could, explore space time and all that kind of jazz. But we don't half live in a decent time at the moment. I know there's difficulties globally and stuff like that. I'm not ignorant to that.
But
I think in the technology world, we live in a great age.
I know it's getting late there. You have a minute or two left, a minute or two more
Yeah,
here?
absolutely. Yeah.
There was a question from someone in the ecosystem in chat asking, are you interested in having ecosystem partners participate and develop content? And I mean, that's even there's a whole business there, right?
By all means, reach out to me. We want to, so I think going forward, we want people and organizations to be able to leverage the platform to put their own content on there.
You're kind of building I mean, it could turn into a whole training platform, which is a kind of a dual-edged sword, right? It's both useful, but hard. Yeah. There's been a lot of generations of those.
Yeah, I know. But you know what? It's super, from my perspective, it complements and augments like books and videos.
Yeah.
It's just, it rounds out that whole sort of experience.
So last question. I got into this conversation on Twitter yesterday or the day before, and we were talking about blogs and about, the treadmill and always having to, this is a whole separate conversation about, how blogs are by design are never done. Right. And so you always have, your blog is always a little out of date, but you live in a world with content, rapidly changing subject matter. You're having, these certs or whatever, the Kubernetes distributions, releases every quarter. But you've actually, as a content producer, what I think is kind of fascinating is you have your main Kubernetes book. You actually have an update schedule for that. You keep updating it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my book, the Kubernetes book, because Kubernetes is iterating so fast. Well, look, let me just start this out by saying that writing books is really hard, actually.
And when I said you're having fun, you're doing more than just like God, another rev of my book. I've got to go sit in the basement for a year. You're doing like you said, you're on site at KubeCon. You're doing this MSB. You're having. Yeah. That seems like fun. But anyway, sorry, keep going.
So it is hard work writing a book, and I would love to write a book on Kubernetes and to have it on Amazon and for it to be useful for 5 years, and I don't have to touch it. I would be happiest guy going, right? But that just isn't the world that we live in these days. So I released the book originally, I think, in the summer of 2017, and it has had 6 versions since then. So 5 updates. I've done an update every 6 months at least. Next year, because I have my brother on board with my company now, and he's taken on a lot of the operational stuff for me, we're expecting to have an update to the book at least once a quarter. So if you have like the Kindle version or an ebook version from LeanPub, you get all of the updates for free. But if you're coming new and you're buying the paperback version, I can't update old paperback versions, unfortunately.
No.
But if you are buying it, you know that you're getting something that is bang up to date. And I test all of the examples as well on Magic Sandbox on MSB.com. And right now, I've tested all the examples on 1.16.2 version of Kubernetes. And if I look at the major cloud platforms, the major hosted Kubernetes platforms on like GKE and stuff like that, they're still on around 1.14 something. So you know that everything that's in the book is like super up to date. And I feel like, look, there are books out there that cover more Kubernetes subject matter than mine does, but a differentiator for my book is that it is, you're not getting something that's 2 or 3 years old. It is like bang up to date.
It's interesting and probably easier than starting a brand new book and with a blank sheet of paper too. I think that's really totally. An interesting modern dilemma and solution, which is to keep your book up to date.
I imagine it's going to be more popular going forward. Like, I know if you write a book on like a programming language or something, generally speaking, that can live for a long time. But infrastructure and cloud and stuff like that it's iterating so rapidly these days.
Yeah. Well, and LeanPub and things like that, have been, thrift stores are full of, useless books. LeanPub and things like that. I mean, I think it's a time for that. Hey, man, we should probably let you go, and you have family and it's late, and also people have to get back to work, et cetera. So thank you so much for coming on. Blew my mind. Learned a bunch of stuff. I'll see you. Hopefully, we'll be running in the hallway past each other next week at KubeCon. Thanks a lot, Nigel.